listening
to the CD Baby
CD Baby
DIY
Musician Podcast.
Hey there, and welcome to episode number 175 of the CD Baby DIY Musician Podcast. My name is Kevin Bruner, your host for the show, and I have some great news. Last episode of the podcast, I mentioned that we thought the live podcast taping from the DIY Musician Conference was lost and gone forever because we had some technical issues in the recording. But we have been saved by Peter D'Amore. He's a podcast listener. He was at the conference and happened to be sitting right up front and recorded the audio, and it sounds great. And so we have the live taping of the podcast for you today. So that will be the Authentic Artist Branding Bootcamp from the 2016 DIY Musician Conference. But before we get to that, we have been getting some great questions by email and by phone, and I've been saving a few up, and I'm looking forward to doing another listener question/feedback show. So if you've got a question you want to email into the podcast or call the podcast line and ask a question, or even success stories or a funny story or a road story, anything that you'd like to share with the podcast audience, feel free to call our listener line at 360-524-2209, or you can email us at podcast@cdbabypodcast.com. Probably be trying to get this in the next episode or so. And if you do call our listener line, try to keep it brief. 2 minutes is about the max on the calls, so try and keep it under 2 minutes. And that should be a great episode. We always love having those listener feedback question shows because they're a lot of fun. Before we get to the episode today, like I mentioned, this is the live podcast taping we did at the DIY Musician Conference this past September, October. And a couple things. You may have heard us on the podcast talk about Lisa Lapine. She was interviewed for episode number 2 of this podcast. She was originally on tap to lead this session at our conference. And as we'd mentioned a few episodes back, it was sort of a tragic, sudden passing of Lisa. And she had been helping us put together this session. And we thought, it would be best to continue on in her honor and continue to help musicians because that's what she was passionate about. And I bring it up because we mentioned it several times through this live taping, and I just wanted to give you that context so you knew what we were talking about. But we wanted to carry on in Lisa's honor anyway with the information because it was such a great session that she had been planning. This session really dives deep into the idea of branding and your story. So I got lots of great comments after the keynote, and the keynote, which was that I did at the conference, which was the last episode of 2 episodes of the podcast to go. And so if you listen to that and then you're like, okay, I need to figure out a story. What do I do here? This session, this podcast goes really deep into that with some more workshop-y type things that you can do in order to help define yourself, help tap into your story, and really give yourself a unique artist identity. There are slides on the screen giving instructions and certain things going on that you won't see on the podcast. And there were some times where we asked people to just turn to their neighbor and talk out ideas and such. So I did try to reduce some of those little breaks where people are talking just so it flows better in podcast form. But the information was great, and the session was a lot of fun. And once again, thanks to Peter D'Amore for emailing us, letting us know he had the audio. And this is the Authentic Artist Branding Bootcamp from the DIY Musician Conference in 2016. Enjoy.
CD Baby
DIY
Musician Podcast.
you doing out there? Welcome to a live taping of the DIY Musician podcast here at the DIY Musician Conference. I'm Kevin Bruner. Joining me is Chris Robley.
Hey.
And that was unenthusiastic for a live taping. You got to put more heart into it. And we are so happy to be here with you guys. How many of you in the audience are podcast listeners? Have listened to the DIY Musician podcast? Okay, we got a good crowd. It's like family here. Off and on. What's the problem? Off and on. Yeah. But we're so excited to be here with you guys. It's great to meet a lot of you face to face that have been listening to the podcast. It's always funny because I'm a podcast junkie myself, and I met Bob Boylan yesterday, and he came up and was talking to me, and he's like, "Oh, by the way, I'm Bob Boylan from NPR." I'm like, "I know, Bob. Your voice is ringing in my head. I know who you are." So it's always funny to hear people that are like, "I've been hearing your voice forever. It's finally good to see your face." So
or really disappointing.
Well, that could be. But anyway, we are going to have a good time today. It's going to be more workshop-y. We've got some good stuff to do and to help talk about branding and our story. But Chris, we haven't given the ground rules. You changed the screen.
The ground rules. I'm
You
jumping. I'm so excited.
There's rules for this podcast.
Okay, so some of you are settled in your seats already, so you don't have to stick to these. But we were hoping people wouldn't sit next to people they already knew or anyone that knew anything about your music. So if we stand up and do some exercises, just find someone maybe in the row behind you or in front of you that you might not know. And then the other thing is, we kind of got to move through a lot of stuff in an hour. So if you don't get a chance to finish the exercise, they're simple. You can take them home and work on them for the next few weeks. So,
yeah. So a little bit about who we are. I know there was quite a few people in the room that aren't familiar with our podcast. We've been doing the DIY Musician podcast since 2007, which is like great-grandparents in the podcasting world. So we've been podcasting for a long time, and really the podcast has just been something that, we would be at work at CD Baby talking to artists. We'd hear stories about their success, and be like, "That's amazing. I need to hear about this. I need to learn what you're doing, and other artists need to hear your story." And so we started a podcast and started interviewing people, and some industry people, some artist people, really focused on helping independent artists move their career to the next level. And I'm an artist as well, but I do marketing at CD Baby, but I'm still an active artist. And Chris, you can tell us a little bit about what you're up to?
Yeah, so I'm the editor of CD Baby's DIY Musician blog. I'm on the marketing team, and I'm an artist as well. The theme song that you all heard was one of my tracks from back when we started the podcast. And like many people in the room, I ask myself, who am I? All the time. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next hour.
Oh, you can go on to the next slide, yeah.
Right.
So there's if you're not familiar with the podcast, you can go to cdbabypodcast.com, check it out. Everything we do today will end up there at some point. And it's also in the iTunes podcast section and all the places you find podcasts. So there you go. A little setup for this session today. Originally, Chris and I were not going to be doing this session. If you've been listening to the podcast, you've heard us over and over talk about story. I even talked a lot about it yesterday in my keynote. And really, it goes back to us meeting this person, Lisa Lapine. And she was sort of a pillar in the Portland music scene, and she was on episode 2 of the podcast, and that episode was called What's Your Story? And that thread has been a continual thread through the years of our podcast.
Yeah, so I talked to Lisa about leading a workshop like this, and unfortunately, earlier in the summer, she passed away from complications of surgery that she was undergoing for cancer that kind of caught everyone, mostly her, by surprise. But one of the exercises that we'll be doing is from her. Like Kevin said, a lot of the concepts that we're going to be talking about are really critical to the work that she did in artist consultation. So this is for her.
Yeah.
So what is branding? it's an extension of marketing, blah, blah, blah. That's boring. Let's think about the original meaning of the word, which is to leave your mark, which could be, a hot iron on a cow's side, or maybe a logo.
Is this a new promo you're doing, branding cows now?
Yeah. I learned it from Martin Atkins, one of his crazy ideas.
You got a cow strategy now?
Yeah, for those listening at home, there's a picture of a cow with my name on the side of it. It could also be a logo that's printed on a label and slapped on the side of a Pepsi bottle or something. That's But you're not a Pepsi bottle. You're, more complicated. So how do you leave an impression that lasts when what you do is so personal to you and dynamic and will change year to year? So that's also the theme of this hour. So we're going to start with one exercise called impressions. So everyone, if you will, just close your eyes. Some of you are cheating.
I'm going to keep mine open to make sure they're closing theirs.
Okay, so think of your favorite artist or band. Got it? Okay, now think of 3 words or phrases that describe that artist without having anything to do with their music. Not theory, not the instruments, not the quality of their songs. Something else. Okay, you can open your eyes. For me, Bob Dylan, I thought of rebellious, troubadour, protest, poet. It can be really difficult to, think of these things for your favorite artists. It's even harder sometimes to think about it for yourself. But close your eyes one more time and go back to those phrases or words you came up with for your favorite artist. Now think, did they do anything specifically to actively encourage that impression that you had of them? Okay, you can open your eyes. If so, that's branding. That's branding in action. But like I said, it's really hard to do for yourself because we're so close to our music and our lives. It can seem either really uninteresting or we think we're like the greatest thing ever when really all you're telling someone is like, I was born in Rhode Island, blah, blah, blah. Like, who cares? So.
Yeah, never start with I was born. That's a tip right there.
How unique of you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's one thing we can do is dispense with the word branding. It's, it's kind of like an exercise in manipulation. That's always what I think of. So as Kevin talked about in his keynote yesterday, your brand is your story. Every one of you is a storyteller. And you tell your story with everything you do as an artist. The instruments you play, the way you write your bio, what you look like on stage, your songs, your videos, literally everything you do that the public sees is basically a word or a paragraph or a chapter in your story, which you tell over the course of your life. But I figured you'd have.
Yeah, well, I like some of the things on the list here that I didn't really mention yesterday because you want to figure out that story, but then even some of the ways you dress, some of the things you do as an artist start influencing and being a part of that story and start conveying that message to music fans, that story. I think that's why, people sort of identify artists a lot of times like, oh, that guy must be a country artist, just because there's something about him, he's dressed a certain way, but it goes beyond just like, hey, do I look like I play hip-hop, or do I look like I'm in an alternative rock band? It's more about, okay, what are the unique things that I need to start drawing off of and making those more visible to people to tie that whole thing together.
Yeah, so why is story important, and what happens when you know what your story is? Lisa used to use the phrase, the reality of the glut, which I think Kevin referenced yesterday in his talk. The glut is the fact that Bob Boilen gets 400 submissions a day, the fact that CD Baby gets 400 new albums or singles to distribute a day. There's I shouldn't say too much music. There's too much music for anyone to, just automatically notice you and care. So you have to communicate about your music in words or in pictures or in a way that isn't your music so that you can get them to your music. Lisa would also say your music is the last thing that matters. You have to take so many steps to make someone curious and open the CD or go to the download page or whatever and click play. And when they do, it's the only thing that matters, and hopefully it's good.
This point is interesting to me because I've talked to so many artists that the idea of saying music is the last thing that matters. They get angry with that statement. They don't like the idea that, what? It's the last thing that matters? It's the only thing that matters. That's what everything's about. Yes, it is. But
Eventually.
play buttons with your music don't drop out of the sky in front of their face with headphones that are playing and they are forced to hear your music. They have to interact with something. At some point, they have to do something that leads them to push play. And that's the whole point. There's this story, this uniqueness, these things that are about you that draw people in, that make them want to push that play button, and you got to figure those things out.
Yeah, so as I kind of rephrase the concept, your story is the invite, your music is the party. So get them to the party.
Your music is a party, Chris.
Oh, okay. So here's a little weird metaphor. Picture a cup of coffee, and what did it take to make it? So there's the coffee bean, right, which is this essential thing. So if we're making some weird metaphor here, whatever's truest and most authentic to you in your art, that's the coffee bean, right? And you mix it with the water, which is, the expression of your music, the albums or whatever. And then you have to put that, as brilliant as the coffee might be, you don't want to just let it spill on the floor. It needs to be in a mug and something that someone else can grasp, so hopefully it has a handle. And then, once the person's got the coffee and the smell is going around the house, other people start wanting it. They smell it and they're, they come downstairs and like, I want some of that. And that's kind of like the way that when you can express your artist story, you're calling on people's collective imagination and they're curious and they want what you got. So don't be a mug without a handle.
Write that down.
So one thing that happened to me, I was in a band about 10 years ago called the Sort Ofs. And we had a pretty specific, sound, but we hadn't in our minds really identified it yet. And we came up with this very awkward phrase, agit prop prog populism for the individual, which I don't recommend you use as a promo pitch, but for us...
Did that end up on why I deleted your band's promo email?
No, but I should resubmit it. I bet it will. Okay, so it might not be the best, pitch, but for us, it identified what we did. We kind of were trying to subvert propaganda imagery and military stuff in our music to kind of make proggy, poppy protest songs. And when we came up with the phrase, everything in our, small career that we had fell into place. Like, we knew what we should be wearing on stage instead of spending an hour trying on different outfits. Like, we knew. We knew what our videos should look like. We knew how to tell people the music we played. Everything became so focused, and what a relief that was. And as soon as we did that, our shows started attracting more fans, and everything felt like it was going. And it was just because we said, we should really try to identify in words what we do. And then we had this criteria to sort of measure all our actions against.
I think this point is a really, really strong point in just like trying to figure out who you are, what you're trying to do. I think the last band I was in Portland fell prey to not figuring this out. And every show, every rehearsal, every writing session, it became kind of this struggle, this kind of conflict. No one was throwing punches, no one was screaming at each other, but just this sort of unspoken conflict about we don't know who we are, we don't know what we're trying to do, we don't know what our story is, that just kind of just, after a while, just makes things kind of fall apart. But when you figure that out, it can be really empowering, and people get on board, and it really starts to fall in line. There's a vision, you're going someplace, and it all makes sense.
Yeah, so then everything you do is a chance to sort of solidify and continue the story instead of just grasping at what it is. But if your life is a story and your music is a story, then what's the title of the story? Like on the front of the book of your life is probably your name or your band name or your moniker. So that means it's extremely important. If you only have 5 to 10 seconds to tell someone about your music, Lisa used to say that 80% of your marketing energy was taken up in the band name. So if you had a great band name, it communicates so much, and then you use the other 20% of your 10-second window to say, and they're awesome, and I'm selling out shows, or whatever other tidbit you want that kind of is the icing on the cake. If you have a bad band name, you have to spend 80% of your time, kind of compensating for that, which is no good. You don't want to waste time explaining what you're not. Some of the examples that Lisa used to talk about is a band in Portland called Hill Stomp, and in 2 syllables they have communicated a sense of like place. It's Appalachian or rural. Stomp, it's percussive and energetic, so there's like a sort of bluegrass punk sensibility. You don't have to wonder what they really sound like, and then all that other time is like, yeah, and they're really good. There was a band that she managed called Thrillbilly, which I think is a great name. Unfortunately, they weren't hillbillies and they didn't play rockabilly. So when she was their manager, she would try and get them into festivals, and she'd say, so they're called Thrillbilly, they're not rockabilly, they're not hillbilly, they're like a straight up American rock band. And then suddenly the person's bored down the other, like, I don't care what, like,
Don't tell me what they're not.
right. So it's, a waste of people's time when you're doing that. There's a guy named James Fare-thee-well in Portland who, it's not his real name, but I think it's a great name because it conveys the sense that he's a singer-songwriter. You kind of have a sense that it's one dude. But Fare-thee-well, it's sort of whimsical and maybe a little bit melancholy too. So I always liked his name.
And this is a challenge in the age of every domain name being taken. It's really hard to find band names, and almost every combination of words in the English language seem to be taken by some other band. But it is something you need to spend time thinking about. We had somebody emailed the podcast, and we talked about it on the podcast just a few episodes ago. It was like a one-word name or something that they realized there was all these other band names, and people kept getting confused, and they felt like, but we already have a couple of albums under that name. Should we go ahead and change it? The answer is yes, because you got to stop with the confusion of, if people can't say your name, if they feel uncomfortable saying your artist's name, if it's gives the wrong impression like this, it's just an uphill battle that's never going to end. And I know it feels like, well, I got a couple albums, or I've got already some songs, I've already played some shows. Just cut it off and change now, because it's never going to get better. And even if you become, I forget what that band's name was, but it was like, even if they became the size of U2, they'd still be losing out to the other, like it was some company that had a similar name that they were always going to lose out to on search engines and things like that. So it's really important to think about these things. Don't rush it. Do some Google searches about the words, and there's some tools online that can help you kind of create some interesting names, like going to just thesaurus.com, or typing in some synonyms.
The auto band generator.
That's my go-to source.
So yeah, Lisa was so adamant about people changing their band names if it wasn't serving them, that she would really convince people to go through the process of finding a new name. And we do have some artists in the audience who are going to just talk for a minute or two about what their band name was, why they wanted to change it, and what happened after they did.
And we've got a microphone right over here, right down here.
Cool. So we're now Stereo RV. We're Myra and Gabe. We're from Portland, Oregon, and we got to do some stuff with Lisa Lapine back in March. Everybody was talking about her kind of in Portland area, and we were having little to no success with our name. Our name was Pending Black. So when we were doing shows, people thought we were a heavy metal band, and we're doing like Justin Bieber covers. So they were coming ready to thrash, and we're like, just take your lighter. So people were kind of encouraging us, go to Lisa Lapine. She's a staple in Portland. So in March, we met with Lisa Lapine for consultation, and she was like, I hate your name. We were like, we hate it too. We hate it. And she said, the first thing that she said is, describe who you are. And we couldn't. We said, we're acoustic pop. She's like, everybody's acoustic pop. And she said, in order for me to sell you to a venue, because McMiniman's is really big, and she would contract and book musicians to McMiniman's, she said, I have to sell you in 20 characters, and you need to figure out who you are. And so Gabe's a beatboxer. He also does vocals, and he does guitar. He also plays harmonica, upright bass. So he's a multi-instrumentalist. I'm really boring, and I just do vocals. So here we are, we're standing, but we're a duo. So so when we were coming up with it, she was feeding us words, and she's like, okay, you're percussive, there's something about you.
And this
She's
was
like,
over like a month period, mind you. Like this was a month period of us meeting with her.
yeah, over a month.
Figure out what it
Yeah. And so finally we came up with it, and I emailed her. I said, we're multi-vocalism, percussive soul pop. She's like, oh yeah, that's good. She's like, I can sell you now. So now it came down to the name. So now that we had our 20 characters, we had to break down who we were as our artistry. And so what happened was we went to the thesaurus and the dictionary and all of the Google places, and we were just like, okay, what's beatboxing? What's the name for beatbox? We know that it's vocal percussion. So when we broke it down, it came up stereo, because back in the day, they would say, go get your beatbox. So now we had stereo. Over the past 3 years, we have been living in an RV. So I know we're really, really cheap, but it created a really good story because we need the money to put into our music, you know? So now we were living in an RV for 3 years. In this 1989, on the back it says, you wish. I was like, yeah, you wish you had a 1989 RV, which we don't know if it's gonna run. So here we are, we're living in Beaverton, just 10 minutes outside of Portland. And we're living in Beaverton at this pad. It's like trailer park trash. Anywho, so I started breaking everything down, and RVs were campers. So then I started saying stereo camper. I was like, yeah, now we're stereo camper. And I took it to my mom. And my brother's 26, but he still lives with my mom because he's figuring his life out. But all his friends come over. And so my mom was like, hey, what do you think of stereo RV? I was like, no, mom, that's not our name. It's stereo camper. Well, she kept forgetting this. So it was stereo RV, and all of a sudden, it started to ring with other people. So stereo RV so what it means is, because we're a duo, stereo is dual. You have your left and your right. It used to be that kickback name, beatbox used to be the kickback name for stereo. And we've been living in an RV, which is where our music, our songwriting, and we're also married. So we have this whole spectrum of taking your story and breaking it down. And so that's what we did. And now, we've gotten more fan engagement. Now people are like, when are you going to bring your RV to our house? I was like, can you pay for the gas? Because right now our little hashtag is the RVers in a cruise. Because we're driving around a Chevy Cruise, and now we're making our own hashtags. Our fan engagement is higher. More people are interested in our music. You got something to say?
Yeah. I mean, she's better at talking than I am, but it also comes down to your branding. Like with a name with Pending Black, how do you brand that name? How are you going to have your merch represent your brand? With Stereo RV, we're like, boom, trucker style hats with our logo, shirts with a logo. But also our logo is an RV with Stereo RV in it. So there's already making that connection between it. And we're doing beer koozies with our name on it. We're doing old school air freshener trees with our logo on it. It's your name is equally as important as your music, because people are going to see your logo and your brand before they hear your music. And if you can get them through your logo and your branding, you got them. And then when they hear your music, they're just going to fall that much more in love with you. And with Lisa, breaking down and finding your name, she would represent it as a tree. So first you have to find out what your roots are. And for us, it's the beatboxing, it's the RV, and it's us being married. Yeah, literally, she would do this, literally.
And then she said, everything has to come from your branches. So if you can find your roots, then you can find your branches. And everybody always has three. You have three things. So a girl here, she was doing children's theater, and I was like, that's part of your story. Try and find that story. So, sorry. So anywho, I think that was under 2 minutes or more.
That was great.
Okay,
That was great.
but,
You
yeah.
guys,
You guys should keep just leading this
Yeah,
session.
sorry.
Let's give a hand for
Hi, I'm Chris Robley.
No, I love that. That's an amazing story. That's perfect right there. I liked it how when you kind of brought it back to the whole brand identity at the end with like merch, because that's such a challenge. Even bands that have great names, sometimes it's even like, okay, well, how do we even just make a t-shirt, or how do we make this more than just here's a shirt with our name on it, but just have an identity where now there's this whole thing that goes with it. That was awesome.
Yeah. So let's see here. There we go. Next. is exercise number 2 for us. Is your artist name working for or against you? So here's the point. If you could all just turn to someone you don't know and that doesn't know your music, tell them your band name or your artist name, and then they're going to tell you what you sound like, or any other impressions they have of your vibe, and you're going to see how close you are. And then, you know, switch it around and do the favor. Take a minute. We'll sing Jeopardy. All right. Sorry to cut off the conversation. All right. Order in the court. So, if you turn to someone and they were misled, then maybe after turn to someone else and get a second opinion. If everyone's confused, you know what you need to do when you get home. So, your artist persona just called. It wants you to get over yourself. Here's a picture of David Bowie. The guy had like 14 personas in his life. You don't need to have that many. You just need one. But what is persona? Well, Elisa used to call it the wardrobe for your soul. It's not something fake. It's not a mask you put on to, you know, fool people into thinking you're really cool and charismatic. It's, you know, a few things that are really true about yourself that you enhance or supersize in some way. And when you do this, you realize that those things are also probably what's extremely unique about you, and that's kind of your musical DNA. What's unique about you is your greatest asset in the music industry. There are 400 Mumford & Son bands right now. We don't need another one. So, you know, you do you. Let's see, okay. Kevin kind of touched on this yesterday a little bit, but what makes you unique? There's a blog post on the DIY Musician blog where I had a lot of sort of self-questions that you can ask yourself. It's called, what is it called? Marketing.
How to create and tell your band stories, what it says.
Oh, there it is. Okay. So you're not going to have time to answer these questions, but I'll read them really quickly. And just whichever ones seem like there might be some gold worth digging for, just make a note of it. You can go to the blog post later and explore that. You know, write a bunch of stuff, brainstorm. And then if you're in a band, have every band member do that, and sort of you might stumble upon your sort of collective persona. But I'll just go ahead and read these. Kevin mentioned some of them yesterday. What are your musical inspirations? Your biggest struggles in your life? Your career highlights? Origins of your lyrics? Any technical innovations in your music? Personal revelations that inform your music? Your biggest triumphs outside of music? Exotic details about your personal life? Your faith, ideology, worldview, political convictions, relatable details about your personal life, because we all like to know that you're just a normal dude. The best bits of band drama and setbacks. We want all the juicy tidbits, the gossip. Any themes that run through your songs, and this is a kind of a cool one because you might not know that there are until you really start to think about the through line of all your lyrics. Your worst touring horror stories. Things you're proudest of in life that can be totally apart from music. Things you're most ashamed of, the reason you keep making music, the thing you're most afraid of, that's a really good one, and why are you still running from it?
I'd like to comment on this for a minute. Yeah. These things, just really taking time and digging into your life, and even talking to some people about it, because a lot of times it's hard to do that self-assessment and realize, oh wow, this has been an ongoing theme in my life, and it's just something I've been dealing with, and it comes out through my music. So it's really good to hear what other people think some of those answers might be about you. Also, I recommend that song, that podcast, Song Exploder, a lot. And what's fascinating to me about that podcast is you hear so many different artists, and some of them are masterful storytellers, and others just have absolutely nothing interesting to say about themselves. And it's such a huge missed opportunity, because if you can't say anything about the music, then how can it be all about the music if you're not even inspired or interested in it? So it's really like, why is this important? What is drawing this out of me? Why do I have to pursue music? And, you know, even with some of the success and failures I've had, it's like, even when you're at the, things seem to be riding high, there's still this thing that no matter what, it's drawing this music out of you. And even when, you know, things are down, you're like, I gotta keep going. Doesn't matter if people are telling me this, I should just give up and do something else. And it's like, what are those themes? What is making you pursue this with all your heart and soul? And so just really getting to the bottom of that is really key to just building that compelling story.
Yeah. So now we're going to do the exercise that Lisa offered for this. It's called the mashup. And before I explain really what it is, let's imagine you have 5 to 10 seconds to tell someone what you sound like, and they're right in front of you. So this exercise isn't really for, you know, a pitch to the media or anything like that. But they're standing in front of you. You have 5 seconds. Maybe they're cutting your hair at the barber shop. And like, oh, you're in a band. What do you sound like? And then you're like, oh, I don't know. It's kind of like this. And, so this helps you answer that question quickly. It doesn't have to be super an accurate answer. What it has to do is be somewhat in the ballpark and related to your music, but also plant the seed of curiosity so that they, you know, they're motivated to actually prove you right or wrong. Lisa came up with this because she was managing a band called Ed and the Boats, I think in the early 90s, in the, you know, Pearl Jam, Nirvana age, and they weren't like that at all. They were an art rock band, and she would say, oh, they're kind of a mix of Talking Heads and XTC, and because grunge was everywhere, people were like, well, who cares? So we don't want that. And she had a hard time booking them. And then the Spin Doctors came out, and that song Kryptonite was everywhere. And she heard it, and she's like, well, Ed and the Boats don't sound anything like Spin Doctors, but this is really, you know, popular right now. And they have a similar energy and a similar sort of funky approach to the groove. I'm just going to start throwing that in. So I think she started saying, oh, it's like XTC meets the Spin Doctors. And suddenly she was getting calls back, and they were opening for the Mighty Mighty Bosstones, Live, Ani DeFranco. And just that little bit of modern contemporary thing was like the magic key that somehow unlocked things in the imagination of the people she was explaining the sound to. So we're going to do a little exercise. Yes, the mashup. Again, it doesn't have to be super accurate, just in the ballpark. Make 3 columns or categories on your computer or notepad. One is classic, one is contemporary, and one is wildcard. For the classic column, come up with 5 or 6 artists who pretty much are household names, everyone knows, and that you share something in common with. Again, it could just be maybe the instrumentation or the genre. For the contemporary column, do the same thing for artists who are breaking like within the last year or two, not Taylor Swift or something like that. It's got to be real, happening right now. And then wildcard can be just any other phrase that seems to fit your music. You know, maybe it's a desert soundscape or who knows, any third thing that comes to mind. So take like a minute and write that stuff down for yourself.
While they're finishing up, I really liked, you mentioned getting a gig and how she changed that. I think a lot of times as artists, when we're approaching these people and telling them who we are, we forget that the person on the other end has a job to do and a boss, and that their job is not to figure out who you are. Their job is to fill slots on stages or fill press stories. And they actually need help getting this job done, and half the time, us as artists, instead of making it easier to do their job and get selected, we make it harder and get rejected. And so this little, what do you call it? Exercise, that's the word. It's still early, it was a late night. This little exercise will really help you hone that in so you have a hook and that person can make better judgments and quicker judgments and do their job better. So a lot of it is just about helping someone else do their job better.
All right, so the mashup portion of this is you take one item from each of the columns and combine them in the most interesting way you can find. So here's the one I combined here, a steampunk Sinatra with Charlie XCX grooves. And again, it's not for print. You don't necessarily have to describe your music like this on your website or in a press release, but it can be really helpful, again, in person, face-to-face. Does anyone want to share their their combination, their mashup with us, and maybe one or two people, and we can tell you whether we think it's terrible or great.
Someone in the back has one too.
A Joni Mitchell voice with the Ministry of Carrie Job.
I'm intrigued because I don't know who Carrie Job is, but I probably should, right?
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody in the back had their hand up, but the lights are also blinding us, so I can't tell.
It helps, so,
Ah.
Sorry, no. Oh, no. That's the saddest thing when you, just took away something from somebody else. But someone once said, I thought it was the weirdest thing, Ella Fitzgerald meets Weird Al.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah.
Which I thought, maybe I should go with that one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think it was also because of the whole act, because it was at a live show, but maybe that changes the branding.
I like it. Do you want to do one more?
Anyone else want to volunteer? We got one all the way up at the front. We're gonna.
Oh, I had 90s sweet grunge reincarnate.
Yeah.
And then someone said with a Chrissy Hind vibe.
Oh, okay. That I thought it was
he's
too
that.
vague for me. I was like a
Yeah.
little bit like, I don't know. But then that gave me a picture
Okay, thank you.
at the end there.
We had one more up front, but
All right, so I've got a thinking person's blend of Van Morrison and the Mountain Goats.
Oh, yeah, I like that one. But that's just my taste too, so maybe I'm biased. On your demo, man. I would come to your show if I was cutting your hair. So, okay, the next thing we're going to move on to the smooth drag from a killer tagline. What your tagline is, the Surgeon General's warning on here, don't smoke.
don't smoke.
A tagline is, for any Game of Thrones fans, and I have my Lannister Brewing Company shirt on, tagline is like the sigil going into battle, or the kind of the house motto. So, for the Starks, it's winter is coming, and the Lannisters, I think, is a Lannister always pays his debts. For your music, it's a quick phrase that captures the heart of your music. It's not necessarily like your influences, it's more, it's something else. So we're going to do another exercise called the Amazing Manual Tagline Generator. Requires your effort here. So I'm going to ask 3 questions and write down the answers, and then we'll move on to the part at the bottom. But for the first time, just concentrate on these questions. What kind of music do you play? If you could change one thing about the world, what would it be? Or this is another way of asking that question. How is your music in service to that cause? Okay, last. Who are your fans? Whether they're imaginary fans that you want to come to your show, or they're your real fans who are sitting in the audience. Okay, I don't know if you had a chance to really get it all down, but the point is you answer those questions, and then you take some essence of the answers of each of them and make a new Frankenstein thing to answer this question. What will I experience when I listen to your music? Because you want them to know what they're going to get and how it relates to their own lives. Here is a few that I came up with, not for the same band and not for my music, but 100% American rock, outlaw country in a world of white-collar crime.
I like that one.
Modern pop anthems for soccer moms. I actually think I should start the outlaw country white-collar crime band.
That's a good one.
So it's a little bit like what Stereo RV was talking about when Lisa needed to pitch them to this McMenamin's Kingdom thing, which is in Oregon and Washington. It's a group of hotels and restaurants where they are really supportive of live music. And on their website, they do a lot to promote the artists that are playing in their venues. They pay well. If anyone's touring through there, check out McMenamin's. But the point is they do need that quick catchphrase. I think they said 20 characters, which these are probably longer than that, maybe some of them. But they need you to capture their imagination, capture the imagination of the people visiting their websites, which is why these taglines are so important. They can double as your Twitter bio or something that appears at the top of your website. And they, again, like all of this, help you crystallize the sense of self that you can measure your actions against. So all of this stuff is kind of an impossible task to assess yourself accurately as you're also changing from album to album. I was comparing it to a Zen koan, which is like a little story or question that you ask yourself that's kind of impossible to answer, and it's supposed to create tension in you, but by wrestling with that tension, you kind of go deeper into your Zen practice. I'm not Zen at all, I'm just pretending I'm enlightened. So, reducing your life and your music to just a few words can be really terrifying and awkward and risky, because suddenly you tell me you sound like, Joni Mitchell, and the other person, I'm like, I don't know the other person. I like Joni Mitchell, but maybe I'm not so sucked into that. So there's a risk involved. You might be I'm not turned off by that. I'm just a little bit unclear, but you could be turning someone off. Like I could say, oh, my music is sort of like Elliott Smith meets John Vanderslice, and someone would be like, I hate that. Just the other night, I rode in a taxi with Bob Boylan, and I was like, oh, here's this music curator guy. I should geek out about music with him. So I mentioned one of my favorite bands. I was like, he's probably had them on his desk concert series. I'm like, hey, do you like this band? He's like, not really. I was like, oh, miss my bonding experience, but so it's like
Good thing you didn't say my music's exactly like
right.
that.
So that wasn't even my music, but I was, again, just by talking about the music that really moves me, I'm putting myself out there, and he respected what they did, but the voice kind of didn't resonate with him. Anyways,
well, you mentioned that it can be scary as an artist, and it can be. It could be because you're taking your music, which you've kind of identified, we see at CD Baby hundreds of titles come in every week that say they sound like U2 or Coldplay. And as an artist, it sometimes can feel good to go, okay, everyone knows who U2 and Coldplay are, I'm just going to say I sound just like them. But in the reality, and so it can be scary to distance yourself and be it more about, I'm unique, I'm worthy of my own title and moniker, and start building your own thing. But when you see hundreds of titles saying, we're U2, we're Coldplay, over and over again, the one that actually says, we're not U2 or Coldplay, is the one that you're going to stop and listen to. So as an artist, I would encourage you to step out from those things that you've been used to, like these easy things that you assume will be instant hooks for listeners to know who you are, that are actually just boring things that make it sound like you're just like everybody else.
Yeah, and again, when you know this stuff, all of these boring words like marketing and branding and stuff, they become more about moving your music forward, which is the point. And it's more about self-discovery. And so that brings me back to Lisa Lapine. She would, you slipped to that one. Yeah, so this was the essence of Lisa's work, is getting people to identify themselves. And she called herself the pro-motion queen. Pro-motion. It's about forward growth. So here's a quote for you. Understanding your authentic artistic self is about growth and motion, not reduction and pigeonholing. So I think we could take 15 minutes of questions.
We've got time for questions.
If anyone wants to stand up and say band names or taglines or the thing from the mashup, or we could give you our subjective opinions.
We've got some questions down here, down front. There's a couple questions here.
I just had a question about talking about the importance of artist names. What would you recommend for singer-songwriters who do perform under their given name? Is it a matter of switching your given name so that it has maybe more of these elements, or?
I don't think you should do that if you're not comfortable with it. I just play under my name, Chris Robley, but I have a bit, sometimes I book it as Chris Robley in the Fear of Heights, which, I don't know, has some additional, you could, and you could have a moniker, just play under the name like Destroyer or something like that, but.
My recommendation would be if your name is easy to say and flows well, and that's what you want to go by that. If you have a challenging last name, there's artists that will sometimes simplify the spelling. I think that's what John Bon Jovi did. Was it?
Oh yeah,
it was Bonjonovich or something like that. But so there's artists that'll do that. Sometimes they go by their middle name. It's really what you're going to identify with, because if you're uncomfortable with it in the first place, then I wouldn't recommend changing your name if you're like, I'm not this person, I'm so-and-so. But the only thing to me would be the real consideration. If it's hard to say and people screw it up a lot, then it might be easier to go by their middle name. I actually I have 2 daughters, and when I named them, I kind of thought about that too. Because Bruner's not a terrible last name, but it doesn't really flow off the tongue really. So I've got Ella Jules and Beatrix Harper. So those are good stage names. I made sure we had those. It's just if they continue the music legacy in the family.
I just have one comment about stage names. I know a lot of people probably would feel uncomfortable just one day saying to their friends and fans, "I'm no longer Chris Robley, I'm whatever." And what's that? Prince. I'm Prince.
Now I'm a symbol. Please refer to me as a symbol. Hold up the sign when you want to talk to me.
Yeah, like we can be self-conscious or modest or falsely modest or whatever. We're trapped in our heads, and you don't want to leap out like that. But I played an interesting game the other night after a gig I played, where we had our iPhones and we were saying the names of people that were famous, from like the 30s through today. And you were playing this game. Matt was playing this game with me. And it was like, what's their real name? Is that their real name? And almost all of them were stage names. Like, not just obvious ones like Sting, yeah, of course, and The Edge, we get it. But like people in Hollywood that, like, well, that's not even all that exciting. Like Tina Fey. Like, that's got to be her real name. That's not, who would change it to Tina Fey? But anyways, it's not her real name. So
Martin Sheen is Ramon Estevez.
Martin Sheen, Ramon Estevez, yeah. So
Ramon's kind of cool.
Oh, I didn't know that. That finally makes sense to me. How Emilio is his son. I've been confused my whole life.
But so yeah, just check that out. Like, think of someone famous, that might not be their name, so that might give you a little more permission to step into an identity or a logo, a name. Logo.
But don't start changing it right and left, because there's nothing more annoying than somebody you know, an artist, like if you feel like you like their music and you have this relationship with their music where they keep going, "Oh, I'm this now. Well, I thought you were that. Well, no, I'm this." And, well, I changed my mind again. And like the Prince thing was an example, but I've had friends where I went away to college and I came back, I'm like, "I'm going by this now." I'm like, "No, it doesn't matter what you tell me your name is now. You're always going to be this to me, So you got to be careful with it. But if it's something where you're developing and trying new things, or even just like simplifying what's already there, yeah, mess with it, see what works.
Just to piggyback on that, because I had the same question, but what if your name is really easy to say? Mine is Sarah Ada. I think that flows pretty well. But my last name is spelled E-I-D-E. And my name is in print all the time, right? So does that matter? And is that something I should consider changing to like A-Y-D-A?
You could spell it differently so it's more phonetic or whatever. Like Louis C.K.
So do you think that that's important then? Would you say that that's an important thing to consider, or does that not matter?
In your case, I don't know that it would matter, because either way, you're probably going to get people misspelling it. And so
Right.
I think it's just, to me, it's more a matter of, since it is your name, they're going to see it in your logo and things like that, so it reinforces that. I don't know. That's more of a nuanced one that you might want to mess around with.
You could do what I do and not care. Like, half my friends call me Chris Robley, half call me Robley. It's actually Robley, but I never correct anyone. So, like, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting you don't care, but it really works for me.
I like the not caring thing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just thought, isn't it cool when you're mispronouncing an artist's name and someone else is like, "It's actually this"? You're like, "Oh, interesting." so it gives you an opportunity to pop back into people's... Yes.
Yeah.
So my name's Katie Vernon. I just perform under that name. That's my name. But so I definitely am interested in some of those. I don't have a logo, so there's a lot of things I'm not sure. But by kind of default, by like happy accident, I guess I have a tagline, because I found where I was sharing my music, I had to describe it in shorter and shorter ways. And so I was like, oh no, how can I get across what it is with, just a few characters? So, but I don't know if it resonates with people or not, but I have, the tagline I use on Twitter is my name and then singer of sad songs on a happy instrument.
Ooh, I like that.
Because I write really depressing songs that I never thought I wanted to share with people and bum them out. But once I started rewriting and writing new stuff on a ukulele, it really connected with people. And so that's how I describe my music. But
I like that.
So I'm
That's a
like,
really
okay,
good one.
I've got one thing maybe that I like, and now I can work on the rest of it.
I think the other thing that's cool about that is you're giving people permission to feel either way emotionally. Like if they want to really get in and weep while you're singing, that's cool. Or if they want to just hear the ukulele, it's like you're kind of saying either's fine. It's not taking yourself too seriously.
Well, and my husband's like, you need to quit saying that because not all your songs are sad. And I'm like, well, that's not really the point.
Yeah, no, I think you have the right instinct.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. So whoever. Thank you.
We've got time for a couple more.
I was wondering, I looked up online about this, but I was just like, oh. So, somebody else has my name, but I added the word the, and I added a letter into my word. So let's say if it's a car, right? And then you want to change your band name to The Car, but you spelled car like with CAER or whatever. Is that okay? Or you don't think so?
I think
this other band is the same genre, just to...
I think
Not genre, but yeah.
In some instances that can work, but I think we see that happening with companies now. Tech companies don't use vowels anymore, apparently, when they're coming up with their names. So we see a lot of that happening. I think it can work, but I think you have to be careful that you don't create some visual word that people naturally want to try and pronounce differently. So I think you can do things as long as it's sort of phonetic or it works with how people naturally see the English language. But if you start throwing in random letters that can make those sounds, but we don't normally look at them that way and think that, then it can be damaging. I've seen bands do that, and it's like, I'm saying that this is the, and then they say, I'm like, oh, I feel like a big idiot now. And now I never want to say your band name. So that's what you want to avoid, people feeling like an idiot when they're having to remember your name.
That wasn't you were giving an example, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to give your actual example?
Yeah, actually I think it's pretty okay. It's the word is veracity. So it's not a really common word. That's why I was really annoyed when I found the other band. But
So you were thinking the veracity, but
with an
veracity
S.
spelled.
So VERASCITY. It's actually spelled without the S normally. So I actually Googled, and there's like no other even company name with that S. So I was just worried about the
But
other
you said
band.
that the veracity, the existing band, is in your same genre?
Yes.
I would maybe.
Okay, so
not
I'll
do
just say
that.
it's Christian, but then they're like metal, kind of like alternative, and then mine is not. I'm like contemporary.
But if you're both Christian, you could be playing a festival circuit or
same place.
churches, and people might be confused and show up for one. And
Right.
I would change it.
You think so?
Yeah. And
Okay.
it sucks when you find a name that you like, and then
Yeah.
you find out it's hard. It's not easy. But I would say in that situation, you have 2 points of confusion. The band one, if I would probably be less concerned about, but it could be an issue, especially depending on what part of the country they're in. Like if you're in the Northwest and they're in Florida and your paths are never going to cross, maybe it's not a big deal. But eventually it might be. But the changing the spelling of the word, a word that's where it's not going to be obvious to people, that might be a challenge. They're probably going to type it in wrong a lot. The label I was on, they signed another band. They were called Clearview, and they'd been playing. They were from Minnesota, and they'd been playing under that name up there. And they hadn't secured the trademark. And when they were getting signed, and the label was trying to do that, there turned out there was a metal band in Texas called Clearview, and they refused to be bought out. They would not sell the name, and they weren't even really doing that much. So the band had to change their name to Clear, and it just really didn't have the same, Clearview. It's got 2 syllables. It kind of had more, I don't know, just seemed to have more weight. And then, so I don't know. If I had been them, I probably would have gone for a totally different name. So you might come up with a name that's even better after you just, do a little bit more workshopping on it.
Thank you.
I think we have one more question.
Thanks so much. So I don't quite have the tagline and all the branding figured out, but I do have a name, and I think the music is kind of about it's for people with feelings of self-doubt or serious, like kind of like the happy, sad songs on happy instruments. But the name is it's called Generic, but I spell it in a very specific way with a 3, G3, and then the second E is a reverse 3, kind of a mirror image. But I am curious, for those of you who haven't seen me yet, what maybe that genre would pop into your mind. And
I would think you were a hip hop artist.
Yeah?
The way, especially using those numbers, I would think hip hop or EDM, something that's more electronic.
Okay, interesting.
Because I've seen that happen in that genre, and if you're going to do that, I would recommend that you make that into a logo and make sure it's everywhere, because people are not going to hear generic and think backward 3s.
No, and when you search it, Google always says, "Did you mean?"
Yeah.
All right, so we have 1 more minute. Can we ask and answer a question?
One more. And Chris and I will be around the whole rest of the conference. We'll be at the after party tonight. We would love to talk to all of you. So we'll be around if we don't get to your question.
So I'm a jazz vocalist, jazz artist, and something I was experimenting with in the last year, because I use my own name and I'm not really soloing, but I tried to do a band photo and actually form a band, something along the lines of like a John Baptiste and Stay Human sort of thing. And I'm just not quite sure whether it's the right direction for me to go and how to then both brand myself as a solo vocalist artist, but also kind of have this band as well. And I'm calling my band Michelle Thomas and Soul Meme. So, it's just more of a challenge of trying to figure out how to kind of like manage two identities, I guess, or...
I mean, I have, with my music, I perform solo under my name, and then if I've got a band, it's And the Fear of Heights, which is, I guess, a similar...
So it's not like unusual?
I don't think it's... if it's something that you're just stepping into and it's a new thing, I don't think it'll be as challenging as you think, because like what Chris said, when his fans see And the Fear of Heights, the assumption is they'll be a band. Okay. If I see Chris Robley, my assumption is it's going to be him solo. And so as long as you kind of build that into what you're doing, like any photos that say your name plus the band have the band in them, and anything that's just you. And it's kind of like if you've got a website, dedicate a section to that. If you're going to be like booking shows consistently with, like, I'm doing tours with a band, I'm doing tours without, just make sure there's some distinct identity to each. You don't have to have a different persona. It's just once you start adding that and the to it, that people know, okay, that means she's got a band.
And if you really want to clarify on your website, like on a gig calendar, you could always just put solo, or put it in parentheses, so it's really clear.
Okay, thank you.
A couple announcements before we go. It's been amazing to be here with you guys, and Chris and I would wish we could just sit here and talk with you guys about this stuff all day, because that's the best part of our job at CD Baby, is just getting to interact with the artists, and because both of us are trying to figure things out as well, and so we're like taking us, that was a really good idea. We need to try that ourselves. So it's just great to be together and hang out and learn from one another, but we got a break. All right, so thanks, guys. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks again to Peter for sending that audio over. I really appreciate it. It was a great session. Had a lot of fun, and we'll do it again next year at the conference. Again, if you have some listener feedback questions or comments and you want to get them in for our listener feedback show, you can do so. You can email us at podcast@cdbabypodcast.com, or you can call our listener line at 360-524-2209. If you got a success story, a mistake story, a question for the podcast, send it in. We'd love to read your question or have your phone call on the show and answer it for everyone to hear on the podcast. And so get those in. I look forward to those episodes when we can get enough questions and to hear what you, the listeners, are wondering about and thinking about, and the success you're having as well. Well, that's going to do it. We'll catch you next time. Bye. You've been listening to the CD Baby DIY Musician Podcast, broadcasting from Portland, Oregon, USA.